My name is Lana Rivera. I'm 33, and on the day my father called me selfish poison was dripping into my veins. I was in the infusion chair at St. Helena Cancer Institute watching the IV line pulse with chemicals meant to kill the disease trying to kill me. My phone lit up with Dad's name. I answered out of habit, out of duty. Lana, your brother needs surgery. $50,000. Now! I swallowed hard, tasted the metallic tang in my mouth. Marco, the golden child, the one who never faced a bill he couldn't toss my way. Dad, I can't. You won't, he snapped. You've always thought of yourself first. Your brother could die and you're sitting there refusing. The blood pressure monitor beeped louder. Across the room, a nurse glanced over. My father's voice sliced through me sharper than any needle. Little did he know the one fighting for life that day wasn't just Marco. It was me. I didn't tell him then, but I was already carrying a secret that would turn our entire family upside down. For 6 months, I had been paying for my own fight, one that cost me everything I had and more. They thought I was just hoarding money, hiding behind excuses. The truth, I was hiding something far darker, something that would make them question every time they'd ever called me selfish. Before I go on, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, hit like and subscribe. I grew up in a house where love was measured in bills paid, not hugs given. Our kitchen smelled like garlic and frying onions most nights, but beneath the comfort of food was a ledger no one spoke about except when they needed me to balance it. As a child, I didn't notice the scales tipping. Marco was the baby with curls Mom adored and a laugh that melted Dad's stern face. Sophia, 2 years older than me, had a soft glow, the kind teachers doted on. And me, I was the quiet middle child, the one who picked up the messes. I remember one Christmas when I was 12. Snow pressed against the windows, the kind that muffled the world. I had saved allowance from babysitting to buy Mom a silver locket at the mall kiosk. I wrapped it in red tissue, tucked it under the tree. When she opened it, her eyes watered, but then Dad leaned back in his chair and said, "Look at what Marco made in art class." He held up a crooked clay ornament. Everyone clapped, laughed. My gift vanished into the pile, forgotten. I smiled like it didn't hurt, but inside, I carved the memory deep effort ignored, while charm was worshipped. At 15, I was already working weekends at the diner downtown. My apron reeked of grease, my shoes stuck to the tile. Tips were coins dropped carelessly by tired truckers. I tucked them into a shoebox. By summer, I'd saved $400. I wanted to buy a laptop, my dream. But then Mom's car broke down. Dad sighed, "We'll figure it out." And I said, "Take my savings." His eyes lit up surprised. "Are you sure?" I nodded. My laptop dream died quietly. The car roared back to life. Marco got rides to soccer practice. Sophia got rides to choir rehearsal. I got nothing. I didn't complain. That was my pattern. Swallow it, smile, pretend it didn't matter. By the time I hit college, scholarships carried me, but every holiday I came home, there was another crisis. Victor's small construction business was always one contract away from turning things around. Sophia needed help with books. Marco wanted new cleats. I picked up part-time jobs at the library, then tutoring accounting majors who couldn't pass. The checks I sent home were small at first, but Dad called them lifesavers. His gratitude was brief, practical. Then the requests kept coming. I still remember one phone call sophomore year. I had just aced my corporate finance exam. My professor had patted my shoulder, saying, "You've got a gift, Lana." My phone buzzed, "Dad." "Sweetheart, the mortgage is late. Just this once, can you wire $800? I looked at the A scrawled across my exam paper. My chest swelled with pride, then collapsed under guilt. I sent the money that night. The next day, when classmates went out for celebratory drinks, I stayed in clutching ramen noodles. I told myself this was love. Love meant sacrifice. But there was one night I realized the sacrifice was only mine. Senior year, I won a departmental award. It came with a plaque and a $1,500 stipend. I was supposed to walk on stage in a black dress, shake hands with the dean. Dad promised he'd come. "Wouldn't miss it," he said. I scanned the audience from the podium, rows of parents with cameras' applause filling the auditorium. My seat empty. Dad had driven Marco to a regional soccer tournament instead. After the ceremony, I sat on the dorm steps plaque in my lap, watching students hug their parents. I whispered to myself, this will matter one day. They'll see me. But deep down, I knew they didn't want to see me. They wanted me to see them, rescue them, applaud them. Graduation came, and I landed an analyst role at a real estate firm, a salary bigger than anyone in my family had touched. I bought my first tailored blazer stiff fabric against my skin and thought, maybe this is freedom. It lasted 3 weeks. Dad called Lana the bank's pulling on my business loan. I'll lose everything. I had barely figured out health insurance forms, and now I was reading small print on default clauses, negotiating extensions. My boss found me in the office at midnight, eyes red. He said, "You've got grit. Keep that." I smiled. Inside, I was drowning. I signed a check for $5,000. It wasn't enough. 2 months later, another $10,000. I didn't tell friends. To them, I was the sharp, ambitious analyst. To my family, I was the parachute. But parachutes fray. One Thanksgiving stands out like a scar. We gathered around Mom's scratched oak table. Marco announced he'd gotten engaged. Everyone cheered. Dad lifted a glass. And thanks to Lana, who helped cover the down payment for their new place. The room clapped. My face burned. Marco grinned sheepishly, not meeting my eyes. Priya, his fiancée, whispered thanks but softly, as if embarrassed. Sophia joked Lana's the Bank of Rivera. Laughter roared. I laughed too. Bitter hollow. That night, while washing dishes, soap stinging my cracked hands, I whispered, one day they'll understand what it cost me. I didn't know then how high the cost would climb. By the time I was 24, the nickname The Responsible One had hardened into something heavier, The Fixer. Every family gathering seemed to orbit around Marco's soccer leagues, Sophia's teaching stories, or Dad's endless plans for his struggling company. I became the silent backdrop, the wallet disguised as a daughter. There was a night when Sophia called me crying. I can't make rent, Lana. They'll kick me out. I was sitting on my own apartment floor, cardboard boxes still unopened from moving into a place I could barely afford. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was calculation. How much could I wire without bouncing my own check? I sent her the money. She promised to pay me back. She didn't. Instead, months later, she posted photos of a weekend getaway with friends. Sunlit beaches, cocktails, hashtags about freedom. I stared at the screen, bile rising in my throat, whispering, freedom paid by me. Still, I stayed silent. Then Daniel, our cousin who floated between marketing gigs, showed up at Thanksgiving in a tailored suit. Big client, he boasted. 2 weeks later, he messaged me late at night. Hey, 'cause short on cash till this contract clears. Can you spot me for the wedding deposits? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. No. I wanted to type it. No, Daniel. Find another way. Instead, I typed, how much $3,000 left my account. I told myself it was temporary, but temporary stretched into years. There's one memory that still claws at me. It was Mom's birthday. I had saved for weeks to surprise her with a dinner at Rivera's Diner, the same place Dad used to take us when we were kids. The neon sign buzzed above the cracked parking lot. The booths squeaked under our weight. I handed Mom a little velvet box inside a bracelet with delicate charms shaped like roses, her favorite flower. Her face softened, and for a moment, I saw gratitude. Then, Marco's toddler spilled juice across the table. Chaos erupted, napkins flying, laughter at the mess. My gift sat unopened on the table edge, glinting under fluorescent light. By the end of the night, no one remembered to mention it. Driving home alone, the empty passenger seat mocked me. I whispered, why do I keep trying? Work became my escape. By 28, I had climbed to senior analyst, then associate director. Long nights in glass-walled offices, the city skyline burning beyond. My colleagues toasted promotions with champagne. I toasted survival with black coffee. Each raise meant new numbers in my bank account and new ways my family could drain it. Dad called one afternoon, voice heavy. Lana, the supplier's threatening legal action. If I can't cover this, the whole business folds. How much? My voice felt mechanical. 25,000. I wired it. Weeks later, I learned through a stray email forwarded by mistake that Dad had already been negotiating with creditors. My money hadn't saved him. It had delayed the inevitable. And then one day, I discovered the truth: his loan had been sold off, headed for collections. I could almost hear the sound of chains tightening. That was when I did something no one in my family ever found out. I used my connections at the firm. Through a shell entity, I bought out his debt. Quietly. An anonymous investor rescued his company from foreclosure. Dad never knew the savior was his own daughter. It was the most expensive secret of my life. And yet at Christmas dinner, he raised a glass to Marco, praising his determination for getting a minor promotion. I sat across the table, biting my tongue so hard it bled. The imbalance became suffocating. There were small humiliations, too. Family dinners where Dad would carve steak and pile the biggest cuts onto Marco's plate. "He needs the strength," Dad would say, while my portion shrank to scraps. Birthdays where Sophia got a spa voucher, Marco got new gadgets, and I unwrapped socks. I told myself I didn't care. But every slight etched itself into me. One evening, driving home from work, I pulled into my apartment garage and sat in the dark car, tears slipping silently. I couldn't name the ache. It wasn't about money. It was about being invisible, about knowing I could pay every bill, solve every crisis, and still never be the one worth celebrating. At 30, I was promoted to CFO. My name etched onto a brass plate outside a corner office. The city skyline stretched like power itself, mine to command. Colleagues clapped, sent flowers. I sat behind my sleek mahogany desk phone, buzzing with congratulations. Then another buzz. "Dad, Lana, your brother, and Priya are expecting twins. We're so happy." I smiled softly until he added, "They'll need a bigger place." "Could you help with the down payment?" Even in my moment of triumph, they reached into my pockets. I whispered into the empty office, "Will you ever just call to say you're proud of me?" Silence answered. That was the year I started to realize I wasn't family. I was infrastructure. The invisible beam holding up everyone else. The bitterness settled deeper each time, but I stayed quiet, because part of me still hoped desperately that one day they'd see me not as a solution, but as a daughter. What I didn't know was that the cost of my silence was about to explode, and it would explode at the exact moment I could least afford it. The year I turned 31, my body started whispering warnings I didn't want to hear. Bruises bloomed too easily, exhaustion clung to me like a second skin, and I caught myself staring blankly at spreadsheets I once devoured with ease. At first, I blamed stress. I told myself it was the endless family emergencies, the late nights in the office, the weight of everyone's expectations pressing into my chest. But the truth had a sharper edge. I still remember the sterile chill of the exam room when the doctor said it. Stage 3 breast cancer. His voice was calm, rehearsed, like he'd said it 100 times before. My ears buzzed. The paper on the exam table crinkled beneath my hands as though it were thunder. I nodded as if I understood, but all I felt was a hollow space opening inside me. I left the clinic with a stack of pamphlets clutched to my chest. Outside, the city roared horns, blaring strangers brushing past me. I wanted to scream, to grab someone by the shoulders and say, "Do you realize my world just cracked in half?" Instead, I walked into the nearest coffee shop, ordered black coffee, and sat alone, the bitter steam fogging my glasses. That night, I stared at my phone thumb hovering over Dad's number. I imagined the conversation, his sigh, his questions, the inevitable pivot. "How will you keep working? Can you still help with Marco's kids?" I couldn't bear it, so I didn't call. I told no one. The chemo began. My hair fell in uneven tufts, clogging the shower drain. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror one morning, scissors in hand, beanie waiting on the counter. I cut it all off, each snip like a betrayal, and whispered, "They don't get to see me like this." At the infusion center, I met Nora, the nurse with kind eyes who always hummed softly as she adjusted the IV. She never pried, but she noticed when I clenched my jaw at my phone, buzzing with yet another family text thread, Sophia asking for babysitting money, Daniel hinting about a new business venture. I'd silence the screen, force a smile, and tell Nora just family stuff. I became a master of compartmentalization. Work treatment, family obligations, 3 worlds I juggled without letting them collide. In the mornings, I'd step into my office with makeup hiding my pallor smile, tight heels clicking across marble floors. At night, I'd collapse on my couch bones, aching bank account bleeding. Still, the requests never stopped. There was one weekend I'll never forget. Marco called, voice panicked. Priya's maternity leave is unpaid and the twins are sick. Can you help with hospital bills? I sat at my kitchen table, a half-eaten sandwich going stale beside me, chemo nausea twisting my stomach. I whispered, "Of course." After we hung up, I threw the sandwich away untouched. Later, when I saw photos of Marco's family trip to Disney, the twins and Mickey ears, I stared until my vision blurred. The bills I'd covered hadn't been hospital emergencies at all. My hands trembled around my phone. I wanted to confront him, demand the truth. Instead, I pressed delete. Every sacrifice carved me thinner, yet I said nothing. Because somewhere inside, I still carried that 12-year-old girl, clutching a forgotten Christmas gift, praying one day someone would look at her and say, "We see you. We need you. Not your money, you." The silence grew heavier after each chemo session. My veins burned from the drugs, my skin carried the smell of antiseptic long after I left the hospital. I'd collapse into bed only to be jolted awake by another text from Dad loan repayment due again. "Can you cover this month?" And I always did. Until one Tuesday afternoon, hooked to an IV nausea clawing at me, my father's voice barked through the phone. "Your brother's life depends on you. 50,000. Don't be selfish." The word sliced deeper than the needle in my arm. Selfish. After a decade of giving, after bleeding myself dry, after funding their crises and burying my own, he called me selfish. I looked at Nora across the room. She tilted her head, concern flickering in her eyes as my monitor beeped faster. My lips trembled, but no words came. In that moment, the weight of 10 years crashed onto me. The Christmas gift ignored. The rent I covered. The weddings, the cars, the business loan I'd secretly saved, the nights of ramen noodles, the mornings of exhaustion, the hair I cut off alone. Every sacrifice stitched itself together into a truth I couldn't swallow anymore. I hung up on my father. My hands shook as I set the phone down, chest-heaving nausea mixing with rage. And for the first time in my life, I thought, maybe it's time they feel the silence too. The day after I hung up on my father, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Family group chat notifications stacked one after another. Sophia pleading about Marco's twins, Daniel dropping sarcastic comments about loyalty, Mom typing long ellipses that said everything and nothing. I watched the screen flicker as the chemo fog dulled my brain, and yet every word carved sharper. They were circling, waiting for me to break. By evening, I opened the chat. "Dad told us you refused. Is that true?" Sophia wrote. I typed deleted, typed again. Finally, I answered, "Yes. I can't help right now." Within seconds, Daniel replied, "Funny. 10 years of bailing everyone out and suddenly you're broke or hiding something." I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles whitened. If only they knew. Nora found me in the infusion lounge the next morning, my face pale, not just from treatment, but from anger. She adjusted my IV and said softly, "You can't let them do this to you during chemo." Her eyes met mine, steady. "You deserve boundaries." The word boundaries felt foreign, almost dangerous, like a door I had never dared open. That week, I started noticing details I'd ignored before. Dad's voice slipping when he mentioned his business. The way he avoided specifics about Marco's bills. I remembered the loan I'd bought in secret years ago, the paperwork buried in my office drawer. Had Dad taken on more debt without telling me? My chest tightened. I needed answers. So I began collecting, quietly, meticulously. At night, when the city slept, I sat at my kitchen table under the glow of a single lamp. I pulled bank statements receipts, every wire transfer I'd ever made for them. 10 years of transactions spilled across the wood grain inked proof of every sacrifice. Tuition payments, car repairs, wedding deposits, mortgages. More than $300,000. I lined them up like tombstones, each one a silent testament to my role. But I wasn't finished. I reached out to Maya Chin, the social worker at St. Helena, who had helped me navigate my own bills. Her office smelled faintly of lavender, calming in a way the hospital never was. "Maya," I said, voice low, "my brother's surgery. The family says it's not covered. Is that true? She clicked through her screen brow, furrowing. The appendectomy is standard. Complications push it into higher cost, but with the right paperwork, insurance can cover at least 60%. 60%? My pulse spiked. They had told me 0. Maya looked up. Did anyone even file the claim properly? I swallowed. Maybe not. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling while the city hummed outside my window. They hadn't just leaned on me. They had lied, inflated the crisis, pressured me with numbers that weren't even real. My stomach churned, not from chemo this time, but from betrayal. The next morning, Victor called again. His tone was sharper, almost rehearsed. Lana, you're the only one who can fix this. You always fix things. Fix. Always. I almost laughed. Dad? I said evenly, what exactly is Marco's bill? 50,000. You know that. I want to see the paperwork. Silence. Then a huff. Why don't you trust me? I whispered. Because I've been paying blind for 10 years. He hung up. I sat at my desk long after trembling, the words echoing. For the first time, I hadn't folded. For the first time, I'd asked to see proof. And his silence told me everything. Later that week, Sophia called, her voice teetering between guilt and loyalty to Dad. Marco really needs this, Lana. You don't understand what it's like to have kids, I snapped before I could stop myself. You don't understand what it's like to fight for your life while everyone calls you selfish. There was a pause so heavy I thought the line had dropped. Then she whispered, What do you mean? But I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Instead, I said, Just stop asking. After we hung up, I leaned against the cool glass of my office window, city lights scattering beneath me. For years, I had swallowed every slight, every request, telling myself love meant silence. But now, as my body weakened and their voices grew harsher, something inside me began to shift. I wasn't just collecting receipts. I was collecting truth. And once I had enough, they'd see me not as a wallet, but as a storm they couldn't ignore. 2 days later, I woke to the chemical taste that always followed chemo, a dull coin pressed to the back of my tongue, and the low throb behind my eyes that made the ceiling swim. I lay there listening to the radiator click and hiss, phone buzzing on the nightstand. The family thread had exploded while I slept. Daniel, unbelievable. Some people forget who fed them when they were broke. Sophia, please Lana. The twins are scared. Mom, call your father. I scrolled until the words blurred. Then I took screenshots. Evidence. Not to use as a weapon, but to remind myself of how this felt when I started to doubt. I called Priya instead of Dad. The line rang 3 times before she answered, breathless, a TV playing cartoons faintly in the background. Lana, I didn't expect how's Marco fever came down. They're prepping him for surgery. She hesitated. Victor said you couldn't help. I'm trying to understand the bill I said. I need documents, the estimate, the policy, itemized codes, HIPAA authorization so I can talk to the hospital and insurer. I know it's a lot. It's not, she said quickly, shame cutting through her tone. It's what we should have done from the start. Paper rustled. I'll sign anything. Marco will too. He didn't want Victor to call you. He said he'd take a payment plan or sell the truck. Victor told him to stop being dramatic. My throat tightened. Send me what you have. An hour later, my email pinged a blurry photo of the pre-authorization denial, a typed estimate with experimental circled in red, their insurance policy PDF, and the signed HIPAA release with my name scratched in. I printed everything and slid it into a manila folder, the paper warm against my fingers. Then I called Maya. She met me in her office between appointments. The room hummed with air conditioning, a soft diffuser pinwheeling lavender into the sterile air. Show me, she said, and I spread the documents across her desk. She scanned, lips moving under her breath. Okay. The denial isn't final. They coded the complication wrong. This procedure isn't experimental. It's a standard laparoscopy escalated for infection. With proper codes, pre-cert is possible. Insurance told them it wasn't covered, I said. Insurance tells everyone that first, she said dryly. We appeal. If we get 60 to 70% covered and you qualify them for partial financial assistance, the hospital can reduce the remainder. The Compassion Fund can bridge more. Then, if there's still a gap, an anonymous donor can make up the difference. I stared at the phrase she used so smoothly, it sounded like a weather report, an anonymous donor. My pulse steadied. Can we move fast? Maya slid me a pen. Fill this hardship form for their household. Priya's unpaid leave is key, and this authorization for me to speak with their insurer. I'll loop in the billing supervisor. We'll need an updated clinical note from the surgeon. Dr. Martinez, I said. He's the best they've got. She nodded. Then let's make the system work like it's supposed to. The next hours blurred into hold music and fluorescent buzz. I sat on a vinyl chair outside the billing office while Maya volleyed acronyms with someone from the insurer, her voice low and precise CPT codes, ICD-10 pre-cert reference numbers. Nora slipped by on her rounds and handed me a paper cup of water. You shouldn't be here on an off day, she murmured. I needed to be, I said. Nora's glance swept the stack of papers. You're doing their job for them. She didn't mean the hospital. She meant my family. By late afternoon, Maya emerged with a printout and a small, fierce smile. They approved 60% pending an updated note. The financial office qualified Priya and Marco for a partial discount due to household income during leave. With both, the estimate drops to $32,000 and change. She tapped the bottom line. I'll put in a formal request to the Compassion Fund for 12. That leaves around 20. 20. The number landed like a stone in a pond, ripples spreading. Not 50, not a cliff, but a steep hill and one I could climb without setting myself on fire. I exhaled, long and shaky. I'll cover the remainder anonymously. Today. Maya didn't blink. She pulled a donation form from a drawer as if she'd expected that answer. We can process through the hospital foundation. It'll post as anonymous gift. If you want to leave a note, I'll include it with the financial clearance to the family. She slid over a blank card. Sometimes it helps to say something without saying your name. My hand hovered over the card. Then I wrote, May your home be well. A friend. I stared at the curve of the letters the way my pen hooked the Y how the F crossed. It looked like me even without my name. I tucked the card back, pulse suddenly loud in my ears like I had shouted in a quiet room. On my way out, I passed the pediatric wing. A little boy in a dinosaur hoodie dragged an IV pole, his mother trailing with a juice box. He grinned at me, gap-toothed brave. I waved back and swallowed against the ache catching in my throat. Anonymous was good. Anonymous kept me safe. But anonymity also meant no one would ever clap for the invisible beam holding the ceiling. I stepped into the evening heat outside the sky low and bruised and called Dad. He answered on the first ring. Finally, he said, They're saying the bill will be handled, I said. By who? By the hospital and someone else, I said evenly. It won't be you, a beat. Then suspicion sharpened his voice. Did you pay? The important thing is Marco will get his surgery, I said. He exhaled a jagged laugh. So you did. You made this difficult for nothing. You could have said yes 2 days ago. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. 2 days ago, you told me I was selfish. Today I learned the bill was never 50 to begin with because no one filed anything. I filed it. I appealed. I got it reduced. That's what I do, Dad. I fix things you don't even see breaking. Silence. Wind hissed across the phone. Then smaller. You should have told me you needed help. I let the word hang there. Help. As if I were the one who kept calling him with outstretched hands. I'm done discussing numbers on the phone, I said. From now on, any financial request comes with paperwork. And not during my treatment hours. I won't answer those calls. I hung up before he could pivot. My hands shook, but not from fear. It felt like closing a door I'd left open so long the hinges had rusted. Back home, I pulled the manila folder from my bag and laid it on the coffee table next to a second folder I'd started weeks earlier, the one with copies of the debt buyout documents for his company. The shell entity's name stared at me bland and meaningless, a mask I'd worn to save him without his pride getting in the way. I ran my fingers over the paper until the edges bit my skin. One day I would show him. Not to humiliate him, but to hold up a mirror so accurate he couldn't look away. That night, Sophia sent a voice memo instead of a text. Her voice was hushed, the rise and fall of her breathing catching on the mic. I don't know what's happening to you, Lana, but something feels wrong. I'm sorry we keep pushing. I shouldn't have used the twins. I I got used to you saying yes. She paused. Call me when you can. I replayed it twice, then saved it in a separate folder named Keep. Not evidence reminder. Proof that even inside the machine, a heart still thumped trying to find its rhythm. An hour later, a message from an unknown number flashed. This is Dr. Martinez. We've received financial clearance. Surgery is scheduled at 7 a.m. Thank you. No name at the end. No label like anonymous donor. Just the bare facts like hospital language always is. I stared at it until the words steadied. The system had moved. Not because of my money alone, but because I had learned to use rules the way they had always used me. I slept for the first time in weeks. At dawn, I woke to a hospital hallway smell in my mind, antiseptic and coffee burned onto a hot plate, and dressed in black pants and a soft gray sweater that didn't itch against my skin. I slid on Mom's old silver bracelet. The clasp clicked like a promise. At St. Helena, the automatic doors sighed open and the morning swallowed me whole. I found Nora at the station, made small talk about the weather until she glanced up, eyes searching. You did something, she said. He'll be okay, I whispered. She reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. Good. When Victor arrived later with Mom, the edges of him looked sanded down as if worry had filed his swagger to a nub. He didn't see me across the lobby at first. He walked straight to the financial office. I stood by a potted ficus I'd hidden behind a dozen times before and watched him lean over the desk, watched the clerk nod and pull a file, watched confusion crease his forehead, and then there it was, relief. His mouth softened. He wiped a hand across his face. Mom clutched her purse strap and blinked fast like she wasn't sure what emotion was allowed. I should have turned away. I should have let them have their relief without me. But as Victor stepped back, he saw me. His shoulders jerked, then stilled. For a full breath, we just looked at each other across the space crowded with chairs and coffee cups and half-heard announcements. Lana, he said finally, voice low. He came close enough that I could smell his aftershave sharp and familiar. They say, it's covered. Good, I said. His eyes searched my face, stalling on the beanie, the flat lashes, the pallor no concealer could quite hide. He swallowed. Did you Marco's going into surgery? I said. That's what matters. He opened his mouth closed. It opened it again. I'll. He gestured vaguely toward the elevators. I'll tell him. Tell him not to worry about the bill, I said. Tell him to worry about getting home to his kids. He nodded, and for a flicker of a second, I saw something I recognized from when I was small. The man who used to hoist me onto his shoulders at street parades, who taught me the names of tools in his garage like they were sacred. Then the elevator dinged, and he was gone. I sat in a plastic chair, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that tasted like ashes, and felt a calm settle over me that had nothing to do with surrender. This wasn't me caving. This was me choosing the terms documented bounded anonymous where it needed to be undeniable when it didn't. On my way out, Maya caught me in the corridor and handed me a stamped receipt from the foundation office and a white envelope. Inside was the note I'd written copied because the original would go into the billing file. My handwriting looked like a secret I no longer had to keep. May your home be well, a friend. By the time I stepped back into the sun, my phone vibrated with a new message from Daniel. Guess the princess paid after all. I stared at the words until they lost shape, then blocked his number. Evidence collected. Boundary set. I walked to my car, the bracelet cold against my wrist, the air bright enough to sting. In the reflection in the window, I looked small, but aligned like a tightrope finally tied at both ends. I had the receipts, the approvals, the donation slip, the messages. I had the shell company file waiting on my coffee table like a loaded truth. I had a voice memo from a sister whose heart might still be reachable. And I had a father who had just learned there are some debts that can't be paid with money, only with recognition. I buckled in and whispered to the empty car, I'm done being the secret. Then I turned the key and headed home to plan what came next. I drove home from the hospital with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The chemo fog was still there thick at the edges of my mind, but inside the fog, a single line of light cut through. I had the evidence, I had the truth, and now it was time to decide how to use it. For 10 years, I had let my family define me as their lifeline, their solution. Now I wanted to show them something different, not with screaming or blame, but with precision. Revenge in my hands would look like control. I laid everything out on the coffee table in neat stacks. Folder 1 receipts and wire transfers proof of every time I had bailed them out. Folder 2, the insurance approvals and discounted estimates showing the original $50,000 number was a fiction inflated by negligence. Folder 3, the debt buyout papers for my father's company, the shell entity I had created to save him without his pride ever being bruised. My living room looked like a courtroom, and I was both prosecutor and witness. But a plan without timing is just anger. I needed the right stage, the right moment where every player was present. That's when I thought of Sunday dinner. We hadn't had one in months, chemo kept me away, but Marco's recovery would bring them together. Victor would insist on a family gathering to celebrate, and I would be there not as a background fixture but as the storm at the center. Still, I knew I couldn't just barge in and unload the truth. That would make me look bitter, unstable, exactly the image they'd cling to in order to dismiss me. No, I had to be surgical. A scalpel, not a hammer. I called Nora first. If my family tries to say, I imagined things, can you confirm I was in treatment during those calls? Of course, she said. Her voice was steady, protective. I'll write a note on hospital letterhead, and I'll come if you want me to. The thought of her sitting at my mother's old table bearing witness steadied me. Maybe I said. But even knowing you're willing helps. Then I called Maya. The Compassion Fund donation makes sure it stays anonymous for now, but keep my name somewhere sealed. If I need to prove it, I want the option. She paused. You're preparing for a confrontation. I'm preparing for clarity, I corrected. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote a timeline. Every date, every dollar, every unanswered text. I formatted it like a financial statement because numbers had always been my language. In the margin, I scribbled notes to myself, Sophia's rent, Daniel's wedding, Dad's loan, Marco's tuition. Each line was a reminder not of generosity, but of the silence it bought them the way they erased me from memory, even as they cashed my checks. When the nausea hit around midnight, I clutched the trash bin and whispered between heaves, "Don't let this body fail me before I finish." The next day, I tested my voice in the mirror. I am not selfish. My reflection looked back at me, pale thin, a beanie pulled low. I am not the family ATM. My throat tightened, but I forced the words again. I am your daughter. I am your sister. And I am done being invisible. I rehearsed how I'd reveal each piece. First, the folder of receipts laid gently on the table like a mirror. Then, the insurance approvals showing them the truth about the surgery bill. Finally, the company loaned Victor's debt rescued by the daughter he called selfish. 3 acts, 1 conclusion. But revenge isn't only about proof, it's about impact. I wanted them to feel it, to realize how blind they'd been. So, I added a final step, a proposal for the Family Relief Fund. Equal contributions, transparent rules. If they refused, they would expose themselves. If they accepted, it would mark the end of me as their crutch. Either way, I would win. I confided in one person, Priya. I called her late one night, the hum of the twins' white noise machine audible in the background. Priya, you deserve to know. I covered the remainder of Marco's surgery, anonymously, but I need you to keep that between us for now. Her breath caught. Lana, why would you still help after everything Victor said? Because Marco didn't call me selfish, because the twins deserve their father, but also because I want the truth to land when it matters most. Will you stand by me when it comes out? You have my word, she whispered. I'll make Marco listen. When Sunday arrived, I dressed carefully. Not flashy, not weak. Black trousers, a pale blue blouse, my silver bracelet. I left the wig in the box and wore the beanie instead. Let them see what chemo had carved out of me. Let them sit with it. I arrived with the folders tucked into a leather bag. Mom hugged me at the door, her hands soft but tentative as if afraid I might break. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread filled the house, familiar and heavy. Marco sat propped with pillows thinner than I remembered, but smiling. Sophia poured wine. Daniel cracked jokes. Dad's voice boomed already, retelling the surgery story as if he had orchestrated it himself. I waited until plates were filled, until glasses clinked. Then I cleared my throat. I have something to share. Every face turned toward me, some expectant, some wary. I laid the first folder on the table. The receipts, the checks, the transfers. The paper rustled under their hands as they flipped through. I spoke calmly, like delivering a quarterly report. This is 10 years of support. Over $300,000. Every time I was asked, I gave. Every time you called, I answered. Sophia's face paled. Daniel muttered, "Jesus!" Dad's jaw tightened. "This isn't necessary." I held up a hand. "Let me finish." The second folder slid forward. Insurance approvals, discounted estimates, Maya's letter. Marco's surgery was never $50,000. With proper filing, it was $32,000. The compassion fund covered $12,000. I paid the rest. Quietly. While you were calling me selfish? The silence was so sharp it hummed in my ears. Finally, I opened the last folder. The debt buyout. Victor's company saved by an anonymous investor me. I pushed it toward him. You thought a stranger rescued you. It was your daughter. Dad's hands trembled on the paper. His mouth opened closed. For once, no words came. I leaned back, breathing steady. I am done being invisible. I will no longer fund crises without boundaries. If you want family support, we build a family relief fund. Everyone contributes. Everyone discloses. No more secrets. No more ATM. The room buzzed with shock. Sophia looked down, shame painting her cheeks. Marco reached for Priya's hand, eyes wide. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, suddenly out of jokes. Mom pressed a napkin to her mouth, tears gathering. And Victor, my father, who had shouted at me, dismissed me, leaned on me until I bent, stared at the papers that told him who I truly was. His pride and his shame battled silently across his face. That was the plan. To make them see, to make them feel, to leave them no exit but the truth. And as I watched them drown in it, I felt something fierce rise in me. Not just revenge, but release. The silence after I laid down that final folder was heavier than any chemo drip I had endured. You could hear the tick of the old wall clock, the soft hiss of the oven cooling, even the faint clink of Marco's fork sliding off his plate. My family stared as if the table had turned into an altar and I'd just set fire to the offerings. Victor was the first to move. He shoved his chair back, the wood scraping against the tile. You're telling me you bought my debt? You. His voice cracked jagged with disbelief. Why would you do that behind my back? I met his eyes. Because if I had told you, your pride would have let the company die. You would have dragged us all through the rubble just to save face. I couldn't watch you lose everything. So I saved it quietly. That's what I've always done quietly. He looked down at the paper's hands, trembling, and for once he had no thunder to hurl back. Sophia's lips parted, but no words came. She glanced at the receipts in front of her, her rent, her down payment, every lifeline I had thrown her way, and color drained from her cheeks. She whispered, I thought you wanted to help." "I did," I said softly. "But wanting to doesn't mean it didn't cost me. Do you know what I gave up? Vacations, friendships, even food some nights. I gave it up because I believed family would notice. Instead, you laughed, called me the Bank of Rivera, and forgot the person behind the account." Daniel tried to deflect his trademark sneer, curling. "All right, let's not turn this into a pity party. You make more than any of us. You could afford it." My gaze cut to him like a blade. "Could I afford cancer? Daniel, could I afford 6 months of chemo experimental drugs, specialists that insurance didn't cover? Do you know what my body feels like at 3 a.m.? When I can't breathe because the nausea grips like a vice? Do you know what it's like to wire money for someone else's crisis while your veins are burning from poison? You call that affordable? The words hit like stones thrown into still water. The ripples stunned them into silence. Mom's napkin fell from her hand. Marco's eyes widened, then filled. "You're sick," Sophia's voice cracked on the word. I nodded slowly, letting the truth settle where the lies had lived. Stage 3. For 6 months. Every drip of chemo I took while you were sending texts asking for money. Every time I said, "I can't," I was hooked to a machine that kept me alive. The room inhaled together a collective gasp. Tears slipped down Mom's face. "Why didn't you tell us?" I turned to her voice, steady but cold. "Because I knew this is what would happen. My sickness would become your excuse. You'd make it about what I could or couldn't do for you, and I couldn't carry that weight on top of cancer." Priya's hand clamped Marco's. He swallowed hard, then whispered, "Lana, you paid for my surgery. While you were fighting this, yes." I held his gaze firm, but not cruel. "Because you're my brother, and you didn't ask. It was Dad who asked, who screamed, who called me selfish. You were unconscious while he weaponized your life against me. I wouldn't let you pay the price for his words." Victor flinched as if struck. Nora chose that moment to step from the corner where she had been quietly standing. I had asked her to witness, just in case they tried to deny me again. She cleared her throat, her nurse's badge glinting under the dining room light. "I've seen Lana in the chair week after week. I've watched her veins collapse, her blood pressure spike. And every time her phone rang with you demanding money, she still smiled and asked me to pray for you, not for herself. She never once asked me to pray for her healing, only for her family." The silence that followed was deafening. Victor's eyes darted between Nora, the folders, and me. His mouth opened closed, then finally broke into something brittle. I didn't know." "That's the point," I said, my voice sharp as glass. "You didn't ask. Not once. For years, you only asked what I could give you, never how I was surviving. You assumed because I was successful, I was invincible. But I'm not. I'm bleeding inside, and you called me selfish." Marco stood abruptly, chair legs screeching. He came around the table and knelt beside me. His eyes, raw and red, met mine. "I'll pay you back. Every dollar. I can't carry what you've carried, but I won't let you carry me anymore." Priya nodded, squeezing his shoulder. Sophia began to cry, hands covering her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't realize. I didn't think you didn't want to think I said. It was easier to let me hold it all. Easier to keep me invisible." Daniel shifted, finally stripped of his smirk. He muttered, "I didn't know it was that bad." "You never asked either," I said flatly. Victor sank into his chair, head in his hands. His booming presence had shrunk to a husk. "I should have protected you. Instead, I used you. I can't undo that." His voice cracked. "God forgive me." I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "Don't ask God. Ask me. Ask yourself. And ask what kind of father calls his daughter selfish while she's fighting for her life." The clock ticked on. No one moved. Finally, I pulled out the last document, my proposal for the Family Relief Fund. I slid it across the table. "This is the only way forward. Equal contributions based on income. Transparency. No more secret requests. No more treating me like a bank. If you agree, we sign. If you don't, then stop calling me when the next crisis hits." Victor stared at the paper, tears dripping onto it. Sophia reached for a pen first. Her signature shook but held. Marco signed next, Priya steadying his hand. Even Daniel, after a long pause, scrawled his name. Finally, all eyes turned to Victor. He picked up the pen slowly, fingers trembling, then pressed it to the page. His name etched itself like a confession. When he set the pen down, I exhaled. Not victory, not relief, something in between. I stood, sliding the folders back into my bag. "I'm not your bank anymore," I said. "I'm your sister, your daughter. Treat me like it, or lose me." Then I walked out into the night air, cool against my skin, my silver bracelet catching the porch light. Behind me, my family sat in the ruins of their illusions, staring at the mirror I had finally forced them to see. And for the first time in years, I felt tall. The days after that dinner felt like walking through a house after a storm, everything still standing but nothing in its place. My phone stayed silent for once. No requests, no guilt-laced demands, just silence. It felt almost foreign. Then slowly, the shift began. Sophia was the first. She showed up at my apartment with groceries, her hands shaking as she set bags of produce on my counter. "I didn't know what you liked," she whispered. "So I just bought what I thought you might need." She lingered by the door, waiting for rejection. I let her stay. Marco called me from the hospital bed 2 days after his surgery. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I meant what I said, Lana. I'm paying you back. All of it. I set up automatic transfers already. It might take a year, but I need to do this. For me." There was pride in his tone, the kind that comes when a man finally stands on his own. For the first time, I believed him. Daniel kept his distance, though one night I received an email from him with a subject line that simply read, "Thank you." No body text, just the subject. Maybe shame has no language. Mom began calling in the evenings, not to ask for help, but to ask how the nausea was, if I'd eaten, if the beanie kept my head warm. The first time she asked, "How are you?" I almost cried. And Victor, my father, was quiet the longest. He avoided me, perhaps drowning in the humiliation of what had been exposed. Then one afternoon at the infusion center, as Nora adjusted my IV, I saw him step hesitantly into the doorway. His frame looked smaller, his hands twisting his cap. "Mr. Rivera," Nora asked gently. He nodded, eyes locked on me. I didn't come to ask for anything, he said, voice rough. I came to apologize. He crossed the room, sat in the chair beside me, and for once his voice held no thunder. "I called you selfish when you were saving my son's life. I leaned on you until you broke. I should have carried you, Lana. Not the other way around." Nora looked at me waiting. I simply said, "Then start now." He did. Slowly. He drove me to treatment the next week, sat in the waiting room reading old magazines, cooked dinner with Mom when I was too tired to stand. It wasn't perfect, it would never erase the years, but it was something. A month later, the first Family Relief Fund deposit notification pinged my phone. Sophia, Marco, even Daniel. Small amounts, but consistent. For the first time, I wasn't the only one holding the weight. Still, the scars remained. Trust doesn't regrow overnight. Sometimes I'd catch Victor staring at me during dinners, guilt carved deep into his brow. Sometimes Sophia's laugh sounded too bright, trying to cover the cracks. And sometimes late at night I lay awake wondering if this peace was real or just another fragile truce. But then on the day of my final chemo session, when the last drip slowed and Nora disconnected the line, my family was there. All of them. They didn't bring bills or crises. They brought flowers, blankets, and a card signed by every hand, including Dad's shaky but present. Inside was a note. "This doesn't come close to what we owe you, but it's a start. We love you." I closed the card, heart swelling with something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Hope. Revenge hadn't destroyed them. It had rebuilt us on new terms. Terms I had set. And yet as I looked around at their faces, I knew one truth would always remain. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering with clarity and choosing what comes next. They thought they had broken me, but all they had done was give me the one weapon I needed, the courage to stop being invisible. Remission didn't mean life was suddenly perfect. It meant I had a second chance. I started walking each morning, letting the sun warm my face, silver bracelet catching the light. My family still stumbled, but now they carried their share, and for once they carried me too. I wasn't the bank anymore. I was Lana, the sister, the daughter, the woman who had survived both betrayal and disease. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, subscribe. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about reclaiming yourself. And trust me, my story isn't over yet.